I want to tell a story called the Juniper Tree. Once upon a time, there was a farmer and his wife, and they had everything a farmer and his wife could possibly want. They had fertile lands, they had lots of healthy animals, they had a fabulous vegetable patch, and in the garden they had a juniper tree. Now, a juniper tree is a magic tree. The farmer and his wife had everything they could want apart from one thing: a little baby. The farmer wanted a strong child who could help him on the farm, and the wife, she wanted a little baby to play with. But none came. So one day, when the snow fell like feathers from the sky, the wife went outside with a ruby red apple and a black handled knife, and she sat beneath the juniper tree, peeling her apple, and she said, "I wish," she said, "I wish I could have a baby. I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care if its eyes were as black as coal. I wouldn't care," she said. "I wouldn't care if its skin was as white as snow. I would not care," she said, "if its hair was as red as this ruby red apple. I just want a baby." Lo and behold, 9 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and his skin was indeed as white as snow, and his hair was a bright red shock like a great fire engine, and his eyes were as black as coal, and he had funny little red lines going beneath his eyes, and strange little red half moons on the end of his fingernails. And the moment that mother saw the baby, she knew that she loved him. However, I don't know if it was joy or shock, but 2 days after that little baby was born, the mother died, and the father mourned. The father was sad for a long time, but after some time he married again because, somebody's got to do the washing up, haven't they? Somebody's got to make the bed, somebody's got to make the bread, somebody's got to run the farm while the farmer's out on the fields. And so the farmer married again, and not long after that, his new wife had a little baby, a beautiful baby girl with chestnut curls that hung around her cheeks like bunches of grapes, and lovely olive skin. And the moment that little baby saw her big brother, she knew in her baby's heart that she loved him. But the stepmother hated him. She couldn't stand the boy. She couldn't stand his funny white skin. She couldn't bear his dark, ugly black eyes. She couldn't abide the vile little pictures that he had on the end of his fingernails and those funny lines underneath his eyes. She couldn't stand the boy, and she made his life a misery. She was cruel. She made him do all of the hard work. She never thanked him. And sometimes, when he was asleep, she would steal into his bedroom and pinch his toes so that he had nightmares. Nevertheless, the boy grew up to be good and kind and strong. And when he was about 12 years old, he came home from school, walked into the kitchen and said to his stepmother, "Stepmother, could I have an apple, please?" And the stepmother said, "The apples are in the chest." So the boy walked over to the great big wooden chest that was in the larder, and he opened up the chest, and he had to bend down quite far because most of the apples had been eaten. It was the springtime and there weren't that many apples left, so he bent right down into this great apple chest to pick out an apple near the bottom. And in that moment, that stepmother stepmother had the most vicious thought that had ever gone through her mind. And she went over to the chest and she grabbed hold of the heavy oak lid and she brought it down on the boy's neck and cut his head clean off. And the stepmother took the boy's body and she balanced it on the armchair in the sitting room. And she took his hand and opened up the palm, and in it she placed an apple. And she picked up his head and balanced it atop of his shoulders. And then her daughter came in. And the little girl said, "Mother, could I have an apple, please?" And the stepmother said, "Your brother's got an apple. He's in the sitting room." And so the little girl walked into the sitting room and she saw her brother sitting there staring into the distance, and she said, "Brother, please could I have that apple?" But the boy said nothing and his eyes just stared into the distance. And so the little girl went back to her mum and she said, "Mum, my brother isn't speaking to me." And the mother said, "Next time he ignores you, just give him a little shove." And so the little girl went back into the sitting room and she looked at her brother, who looked straight ahead, and said, "Brother, please can I have an apple?" But the brother, he said nothing. His eyes carried on staring into the distance and he said nothing from his lips. And so the little girl walked up to him and she gave him a shove on his cold shoulder, and his head rolled off the top of his shoulders and off into the floor and along the ground into the fire grate as was covered with ash. And the little girl screamed, and the mother came storming in. "Now look what you've done, you silly little girl! And what am I going to do this evening? I haven't got your father any dinner. I'll have to go up to the shop to get some meat." And she looked at the boy's body and she looked at her daughter and she said, "Right, get down the bottom of the garden and pull me up from the bottom of the garden some potatoes and some carrots." And so the little girl dug up some potatoes and carrots down at the bottom of the vegetable patch, and the mother got her great meat cleaver and her chopping board and she chopped up the little boy, and then she took her cauldron and filled it with fresh water and scraped the meat from the chopping board into the cauldron, and then she hung the cauldron on the tripod above the fire and she stoked up the fire. And the little girl came in with the carrots and the potatoes and she chopped all of those up, and the mother said, "Get down and get me an onion." So the little girl went down to get an onion, brought the onion back, the mother chopped up the onion. She found a little clove of garlic, chopped that up as well, scraped it into the pot, a bit of salt, bit of pepper, bouquet garni, and she cooked up a delicious sun stew. And the father came home from work, and the little girl was sitting under the table crying, and the stepmother laid the table with his spoon and his fork, and she took a dish and she dished up some of the sun stew for her husband, and she put it in front of him, and the farmer took up his spoon and he tasted the soup. "That is disgusting," he said. "I'm not eating this soup, it's foul." And he saw the little girl crying under the table. "Take this soup outside and bury it," he said. And so the little girl scraped the soup from his bowl back into the cauldron, took the whole cauldron outside, took a fork, dug a hole underneath the juniper tree in the garden, poured the soup in, buried the soup, and then went upstairs and went to bed. That night was a full moonshine night, and the moon shone down through the branches of the juniper tree and onto the ground below. And under the soil, the bones began to move, and one bone wiggled its way up from beneath the soil, and another emerged, and one bone jumped on the other bone, and more bones wiggled up, and they jumped on top of each other, and they made a little skeleton, but it wasn't the skeleton of a little boy, it was the skeleton of a bird. And the little bird grew a beak, and skin grew on the bones, and flesh beneath the skin, and feathers on top of the skin. And the little brown bird flew up in the air and far, far away, all the way to the hat maker. And the milliner was working in her studio, and the little bird tapped on the window, and the milliner opened up her window, and the little bird sang, "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My little sister buried me under the juniper tree. Kyrie, what a strange bird am I." And the milliner, with tears poured down her cheeks, and she said, "You poor thing, is there anything I can do to help?" And the little bird said, "Yeah, you can make me a hat." And so the milliner worked all night and made a beautiful red felt hat. And in the morning, she put it on the little bird's head, and the little bird flew up in the air and far, far away, all the way to the watchmaker's. And the little bird alighted on the watchmaker's windowsill and tapped on the window, dot, 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 dot. And the watchmaker opened up the window, and there was the little bird, and the little bird sang, "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My little sister buried me under the juniper tree. Kyrie, what a strange bird am I." And the watchmaker had tears streaming down his cheeks, and he said, "You poor little thing, is there anything I can do to help?" And the little bird said, "Yeah, you can make me a watch." And so the watchmaker made a beautiful golden watch and worked all night, and in the morning he threaded the watch on a golden chain, and he put the clasp together, and he took the bird's hat off and put it over the bird's neck, put the hat back on, and the little bird flew up in the air and far, far away, all the way to the windmill. And the sails of the windmill were still, because the men were changing the millstone, and they rolled out the old and they rolled in the new millstone, and our little bird alighted on the old millstone, and it sang a song, and you can join in with me if you like. "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My little sister buried me under the juniper tree. Kyrie, what a strange bird am I." And the men, they really wanted to cry, but they couldn't because they were shown up in front of each other. So they just scratched themselves and elbowed each other. And they said, "Well, what can we do? How can we help you? What do you expect us to do?" And the little bird said, "You could give me the millstone." And the men said, "Don't be ridiculous, you're just a tiny little bird, you couldn't carry this millstone." And the little bird said, "Well, watch me." You get a great big piece of rope, you put it through the eye of the millstone, tie a knot, put it round my neck, and see me fly. And so the men, they rose to the challenge. They took a great big thick long length of rope, put it through the eye of the millstone, tied a very tight knot, put it round the bird's neck, and looked on agog as that bird flew up into the air and far, far away, with the red hat on and the gold watch on and the millstone trailing out behind it. And the little bird flew all the way home, all the way to the house where it lived with its father and its stepsister and its stepmother. And the little bird alighted on the roof, and it was Sunday lunchtime, and the family were downstairs in the kitchen eating their Sunday lunch. And the little bird sang, and the little bird sang, "My mother, she killed me." And the little girl said, my brother, I can hear my brother." And she jumped up from the table and she ran outside, and as she went across the threshold, a beautiful red felt hat landed on her head, and she danced around the garden, and the little bird sang, "My father, he ate me. And the father said, my son, I can hear my son singing. And he ran outside of the front door, and as he went across the threshold, a golden watch landed around his neck. And he saw his little girl in the garden, and he picked her up and he kissed her on both cheeks. And the little bird sang, my little sister buried me. And the stepmother in the kitchen felt the weight of a terrible foreboding across the back of her shoulders, and she had an itching and an awful feeling that something terrible was about to happen. And she ran outside of the house, right out of the front door, and as she went across the threshold, the great millstone came down upon her and killed her flat, dead. And the little bird sang, under the juniper tree, Kyrie, what a strange bird am I. And the little bird flew up in the air and alighted in the branches of the juniper tree, and in that moment the juniper tree just burst into flames. And the flames died down, and there was nothing left but a charred black trunk. And the farmer, he went to his hut and he got his axe and he split open the trunk, and inside was the boy. The boy with pure snowy white skin, with a great shock of red hair, with coal black eyes. That boy came out of the trunk of the tree, and him and his sister and his father lived happily ever after. The end.